Harlem, New York City. February 1936. 12 men are dead, killed in a single night of coordinated violence that stretched from 125th Street to the Italian enclave of East Harlem and back again. The bodies found in alleyways, automobiles, and one inside a barbershop still open for business represent the bloodiest gang confrontation this city has seen since the bootleg wars went cold 3 years ago. At the center, an ultimatum delivered by Joseph Bonanno, a 29-year-old Sicilian operator with ambitions that span boroughs, and Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the 30-year-old enforcer who controls narcotics, numbers, and protection rackets across Upper Manhattan's black neighborhoods. The flashpoint: control of policy banking operations in Central Harlem, a cash machine generating an estimated $35,000 weekly. Bonanno, representing a coalition of Italian syndicates looking to expand north of 110th Street, reportedly demanded Johnson cede half his territory and 40% of weekly policy receipts or face systematic elimination. Johnson refused. By 3 o'clock Thursday morning, the shooting started. By dawn Friday, the body count stood at 12. And by morning, the city understood this wasn't a bluff. This is a reconstructed account based on public reporting, historical records, and widely circulated accounts from the period. Some details vary across sources, and certain events remain disputed or unverified. Where uncertainty exists, we note it. What follows is the fullest picture available of a night that redrew territorial lines in America's most volatile underworld market. The spark ignited Tuesday afternoon, February 11th, inside a third-floor walk-up on Lenox Avenue and 132nd Street. The location was neutral ground, a policy bank office jointly overseen by Black and Italian runners as part of a fragile revenue-sharing arrangement brokered 18 months earlier. Present were 4 men: Joseph Bonanno, accompanied by a lieutenant named Gaspar de Gregorio, Bumpy Johnson, and Freddie Moore, Johnson's trusted numbers lieutenant. According to 2 witnesses who were present in adjoining rooms and later spoke to investigators, the meeting was scheduled as routine reconciliation of accounts. It became something else. Bonanno, witnesses said, arrived with a typed memorandum unusual in a world where deals were made by handshake and word. The memorandum, which no copy of survives but which multiple sources later described, outlined a proposed restructuring. The Italian syndicates, Bonanno explained, were consolidating operations. Harlem's policy banks, previously treated as independent operations under the protection of various local bosses, would now be incorporated into a unified citywide system. The new structure required Johnson to surrender operational control of all policy banks north of 125th Street and west of Lenox Avenue. In exchange, Johnson would receive a flat weekly payment of $6,000 and protection from rival black operators seeking to challenge his remaining territory. Johnson's reply, according to Freddie Moore's later statement to police, was immediate and unambiguous. "I don't work for nobody," Johnson reportedly said. "I work with people or I work alone." He pushed the memorandum back across the table. Moore, in his statement, said Johnson then stood, told Bonanno the meeting was finished, and walked toward the door. What happened next is where accounts diverge. Moore claimed Bonanno said, "You're making a mistake you can't afford." Another witness, a building superintendent who was in the hallway, later told a black newspaper that he heard raised voices and the phrase 12 hours shouted in Italian. Bonanno's version, relayed years later in a biography, suggested the meeting ended cordially and that subsequent violence was the result of rogue actors misinterpreting his intentions. What is not in dispute, by 6 o'clock that evening, Johnson had called an emergency meeting of his top 15 enforcers at a social club on West 139th Street. By 8 o'clock, Bonanno was seen entering a restaurant on 16th Street and Italian Harlem, accompanied by 8 men. Police later confirmed they received an anonymous tip at 9:15 p.m. warning of imminent violence in Central Harlem, but provided no details. The tip was filed and no action taken. At 11:40 p.m., the first shots were fired outside the Renaissance Ballroom on 138th Street and 7th Avenue, where 2 of Johnson's collectors were leaving after a social event. Both men were killed. Their bodies were discovered at 12:30 a.m. Wednesday by a transit worker. By the time the sun rose on Wednesday, February 12th, 4 more men were dead, 2 Italian, 2 black, and the entire neighborhood understood that the ultimatum had expired and the answer was war. Wednesday, February 12, 12:30 a.m. 2 bodies discovered outside the Renaissance Ballroom: James Slim Carter, age 34, and Louis Perkins, age 28, both policy collectors working under Bumpy Johnson. Both shot multiple times at close range. No witnesses come forward. Police arrive at 12:50 a.m. and find spent shell casings from two different firearms. A detective notes in his report that the killings bear the hallmarks of professional execution. Wednesday, 3:15 a.m. An automobile is found burning on East 118th Street near Pleasant Avenue, deep in Italian East Harlem. Inside are two bodies later identified as Anthony Longo and Salvatore Sally Martino, both known associates of smaller Italian gambling operations. Cause of death: gunshot wounds to the head, inflicted before the vehicle was torched. Investigators believe the men were killed elsewhere and the car burned to destroy evidence. The location, hostile territory for Johnson's crew, suggests either a bold reprisal or the involvement of a third party seeking to intensify the conflict. Wednesday, 7:00 a.m. Police Commissioner Louis Valentine holds an emergency briefing with precinct captains from the 28th, 30th, and 32nd precincts, which cover Harlem and East Harlem. Valentine orders increased patrols and instructs officers to detain known gambling operatives for questioning. According to a later report in the Amsterdam News, the orders are largely ignored. One captain is quoted anonymously as saying, "We can't arrest 100 men on speculation. And even if we could, no one's talking." Wednesday, 11:45 a.m. A barber shop on Lenox Avenue and 127th Street becomes a crime scene. The victim, Edward Easy Thompson, a prominent policy banker who operated independently but maintained friendly ties with Johnson. Thompson is found slumped in a barber's chair, shot twice in the chest. The barber, who fled immediately and did not return, later tells police he saw two men enter, shoot Thompson without a word, and leave. He could not or would not provide descriptions. The killing sends a clear message: neutrality will not be tolerated. Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. Bumpy Johnson is spotted entering the Savoy Ballroom on Lenox Avenue accompanied by 6 armed men. Witnesses say he remains inside for 90 minutes. While no official record of the meeting exists, later accounts suggest Johnson used the time to consolidate alliances with smaller Harlem operators and to make clear that any cooperation with Bonanno's proposed takeover would be considered betrayal. One attendee, speaking years later, recalled Johnson saying, "They want to take food out of our mouths and call it business. We call it war." Wednesday, 6 p.m. 3 men are shot outside a social club on East 115th Street. 2 die at the scene. The third, critically wounded, is taken to Harlem Hospital, where he dies 4 hours later without regaining consciousness. All 3 are identified as low-level enforcers with ties to the Bonanno faction. Police recover more than 30 shell casings, suggesting a sustained gun battle. No arrests are made. Witnesses, as usual, claim to have seen and heard nothing. Wednesday, 10:20 p.m., a Policy Bank office on West 145th Street is firebombed. The building, a 3-story tenement, is evacuated without casualties, but the first floor where the gambling operation was headquartered is destroyed. Firefighters contained the blaze within 40 minutes. Investigators determined that gasoline was poured through the mail slot and ignited. The office was jointly operated under the old revenue-sharing agreement between Johnson's network and an Italian crew. The attack is widely interpreted as a statement: shared operations are over. Thursday, February 13 to 1:10 a.m. 2 more bodies are found in an alley behind a warehouse on East 106th Street, just south of Italian Harlem. Both victims are black men in their 20s with no known criminal records. Police believe they were mistaken for Johnson associates. Their deaths bring the toll to 11. Community leaders, alarmed by the possibility of random killings, begin circulating warnings urging residents to stay indoors after dark. Thursday, 9 a.m. The New York Times runs a brief item on page 12. Gang violence continues in Harlem. Police seek leads. The article mentions a series of shootings but provides no context about the underlying territorial struggle. Black-owned newspapers, by contrast, publish front-page stories naming both Bonanno and Johnson and describing the violence as a war for Harlem's economic survival. Thursday, 30:45 p.m., the 12th, and final body is discovered inside a parked sedan on West 133rd Street. The victim, Vincent Colombo, a mid-level operator in the Bonanno network, shot 4 times. His murder in the heart of Johnson's stronghold is seen as a final, defiant message. Police find no witnesses. By nightfall, both sides appear to have pulled back. The shooting stops. An eerie quiet settles over Harlem. Investigators and community members alike wonder whether the violence has ended or simply paused. To understand how 12 men could die in a single night over gambling receipts, you must first understand the two men at the center and the very different worlds they represent. Died. A. Joseph Bonanno arrived in the United States from Sicily in 1924, age 19, part of the great wave of Italian immigration that reshaped New York's ethnic landscape. Unlike many immigrants who settled into manual labor, Bonanno entered a world already organized, the Castellammarese clan, a network of Sicilian immigrants who controlled bootlegging, extortion, and labor racketeering in Brooklyn and parts of Manhattan. Bonanno proved capable and ambitious. By 1931, at age 26, he had survived the Castellammarese War, a bloody internal conflict among Italian syndicates that left dozens dead and resulted in a restructured underworld divided into 5 primary families. Bonanno emerged as the youngest leader of one of those families. His operation by 1936 was vertically integrated and disciplined. He controlled a portfolio that included illegal alcohol distribution. Prohibition had ended, but untaxed liquor remained profitable. Labor union infiltration, loan sharking, and, increasingly, gambling. His organizational model borrowed from corporate America: hierarchy, specialization, insulation of leadership from street-level crime. He rarely touched contraband himself. He employed buffers underbosses, captains, soldiers who carried out orders while preserving deniability at the top. He kept meticulous financial records, hidden but detailed, to track profit and ensure loyalty. Bonanno's ambitions in 1936 extended beyond his existing territories in Brooklyn and Lower Manhattan. Harlem, with its exploding population and thriving underground economy, represented untapped revenue. But Harlem was not open terrain. It was controlled by a patchwork of black operators who had built their own systems, their own enforcement, their own political protection. Bonanno's strategy was consolidation, offer partnership on his terms, and if partnership was refused, apply pressure until resistance became unsustainable. The policy banks Harlem's numbers racket were the target. They generated enormous cash flow, required minimal overhead, and were difficult for authorities to penetrate because they depended on community trust and participation. Bonanno, by all accounts, saw the Harlem expansion as inevitable. In his view, crime, like any industry, required economies of scale. Independent operators were inefficient. A unified system, he believed, would maximize profit, reduce internal conflict, and present a united front against law enforcement. His offer to Johnson was, from his perspective, generous: retain a role, accept a guaranteed income, avoid a war you cannot win. Johnson's refusal, he would later claim, was emotional, not rational. Side B. E.L. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, called Bumpy since childhood due to a prominent bump on the back of his head, was born in South Carolina in 1905 and arrived in Harlem. In 1919, part of the Great Migration that brought millions of black Americans north in search of work and freedom from Jim Crow terror, he found Harlem in transformation. A cultural renaissance was underway, jazz clubs and theaters flourished, but so did poverty, overcrowding, and predatory landlords. The legal economy offered black men few pathways to wealth. The illegal economy offered more. Johnson's rise was different from Bonanno's. He had no established family network, no old-world clan to provide capital and protection. He built his reputation through violence, loyalty, and an acute understanding of Harlem's social fabric. By the late 1920s, he was working as an enforcer for Stephanie St. Clair, a formidable black woman who ran Harlem's most successful policy bank operation. Policy, also called numbers, was simple. Players bet small amounts on 3-digit numbers drawn daily. Payouts were steep, odds were long, and volume was enormous. It was a poor man's lottery, and it was everywhere. When Italian syndicates first tried to muscle into Harlem's numbers racket in the early 1930s, St. Clair resisted. Johnson, her chief enforcer, fought alongside her. The result was a brutal 2-year conflict that ended in compromise, revenue-sharing agreements, joint operations in certain areas, and tacit boundaries respected by both sides. Johnson inherited this fragile detente when he gradually took over operations from St. Clair, who stepped back after repeated arrests and harassment by police. By 1936, Johnson controlled or influenced virtually every major policy bank north of 110th Street. His network employed hundreds of runners, collectors, bookkeepers, enforcers, and generated weekly revenues estimated at $35,000 or more, depending on the week and the season. Unlike Bonanno, Johnson did not operate from a distance. He was visible, personal, known. He settled disputes face to face. He attended funerals. He loaned money to families in distress. He was feared but also respected, and in Harlem, respect translated into intelligence. People talked to him, warned him, protected him. Johnson's refusal of Bonanno's ultimatum was not irrational. It was existential. To surrender control was to surrender legitimacy. In a world where reputation was currency, capitulation would invite challenges not just from Bonanno, but from rival black operators, from ambitious underlings, from anyone who smelled weakness. Moreover, Johnson understood that Bonanno's offer was not partnership, it was employment. He would become a functionary in someone else's system, a middle manager with no autonomy. For a man who had fought his way from poverty to power, the offer was intolerable. The two men, then, represented not just rival criminal enterprises but conflicting visions of how power should be organized in a city where the old rules were collapsing and new ones had not yet been written. Bonanno believed in consolidation, hierarchy, efficiency. Johnson believed in autonomy, community roots, and the principle that the people who built something should control it. The clash was personal, but it was also structural, and it was, by February 1936, unavoidable. To understand why 12 men died over policy banking, you must understand what policy banking is, how it works, and why it generates the kind of money worth killing for. Policy, also called the numbers racket or the numbers game, is a lottery. But unlike state-run lotteries that would emerge decades later, policy in the 1930s is illegal, unregulated, and entirely cash-based. It operates through a distributed network of runners, collectors, and bankers, all of whom take a cut of the action. The game is simple. A player selects a three-digit number, anything from 00 to 999. The player places a bet, typically between 5 cents and $1, though larger bets are not uncommon. The bet is recorded by a runner who works a specific route: a block, a building, a set of businesses. The runner collects slips and cash throughout the day and delivers them to a collector who consolidates the bets and passes them up the chain to a policy bank. The winning number is drawn daily, typically based on publicly reported figures to ensure fairness and prevent rigging. Common methods in Harlem during this period include using the last 3 digits of the total handle at a local racetrack or the last digits of U.S. Treasury balance figures published in newspapers. The number is announced in the late afternoon. Winners are paid out at odds of 600 to 1, meaning a dime bet returns $60. The appeal is obvious. For pocket change, a working man or woman can dream of a windfall. The economics are ruthless and efficient. Let's break down a typical week in a mid-size Harlem policy bank operation. Weekly handle. Total bets collected. $50,000 payout to winners, approximately 10% of handle. $5,000 operating expenses, runners, collectors, enforcers, rent, bribes. $10,000 net profit to the banker, $35,000. That's one operation, one neighborhood, 1 week. Bumpy Johnson, by 1936, controls or takes a cut from at least a dozen such operations, meaning his network generates upwards of $400,000 in weekly handle and well over $200,000 in monthly profit. Annually, conservatively, Johnson's policy empire is a multi-million-dollar enterprise. And Harlem is just one neighborhood. Bonanno sees the same members and sees waste, too many independent operators, too much internal competition, too little coordination, too many missed opportunities for expansion. The beauty of policy from a criminal enterprise perspective is that it is nearly invisible to law enforcement. There are no large shipments to intercept, no warehouses to raid, no product that can be seized. Everything is paper betting slips that can be destroyed instantly in cash, which is untraceable. Enforcement depends on community cooperation, and in neighborhoods where police are seen as occupiers rather than protectors, cooperation is non-existent. Moreover, policy serves a social function. It offers hope. It circulates money within the community. Winning players spend locally. Runners and collectors are neighbors, known and trusted. To crack down on policy is to crack down on a system that, for all its illegality, is woven into the economic and social fabric of the neighborhood. This is what Bonanno wants to control. This is what Johnson refuses to surrender. The $35,000 in weekly profit that Johnson's operation generates is not just money, it is payroll for hundreds of families. It is political influence purchased through strategic payments to police and ward bosses. It is respect and fear and legitimacy. Losing it means losing everything. And so, when Bonanno demands 40% and operational control, he is not negotiating, he is issuing ultimatum. Johnson's rejection is not pride, it is survival. A response from law enforcement and the broader community reveals the tangled relationship between legal authority, criminal power, and the people caught between them. Police Commissioner Louis Valentine, who took office in 1934 as part of Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's reform administration, publicly condemns the violence and promises swift action. At a press conference Thursday afternoon, Valentine describes the killings as an outrage that will not be tolerated in this city and announces the formation of a special task force to investigate organized gambling in Harlem. He assigns 20 detectives to the case and authorizes round-the-clock patrols in affected neighborhoods. On paper, the response is robust. In practice, it is theater. The fundamental problem is that policy banking, while illegal, operates with the tacit approval and often active protection of corrupt police officers, precinct captains, and political operatives who receive regular payments in exchange for warnings about raids and selective enforcement. Investigators later estimate that Johnson's operation alone pays upwards of $5,000 monthly in bribes distributed across 3 precincts. Bonanno's network, with its deeper pockets and broader reach, likely pays more. The result is that any serious crackdown threatens not just the criminals but the officers and officials who profit from the status quo. Valentine's task force makes arrests. 32 people are detained for questioning over the next 2 weeks, but none of the arrests touch Johnson, Bonanno, or anyone in their inner circles. Low-level runners are charged with minor offenses, held briefly, and released. The violence stops not because of police pressure, but because both sides calculate that continued bloodshed serves no strategic purpose. The community response is more complex. In Harlem, where the police are widely seen as an occupying force more interested in harassment than protection, there is little faith that law enforcement will or can resolve the crisis. But there is also fear. 12 men are dead, some of them bystanders or victims of mistaken identity. Residents worry about stray bullets, about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ministers and community leaders call for peace. The Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr., pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church and one of Harlem's most influential voices, delivers a sermon on Sunday, February 16th, condemning the violence but also pointing to its roots. When men cannot feed their families through honest work, he says, they will turn to dishonest work. And when powerful men seek to steal even that, blood is the result. There is also a strain of pragmatic acceptance. Policy banking employs people, it circulates money. Johnson, for all his violence, is seen by many as a community figure, someone who contributes to local causes, who protects Harlem operators from outside exploitation. Bonanno, by contrast, is an outsider, a representative of forces that have historically extracted wealth from black neighborhoods without giving back. The 12 dead are mourned, but the broader conflict is understood not as senseless gang violence, but as a struggle over who controls Harlem's economic fate. The authorities, compromised and ineffective, are largely irrelevant to the outcome. In the 72 hours after the shooting stops, the city watches and waits. 3 possible outcomes emerge, each with its own logic, its own costs, and its own implications for the future of organized crime in New York. Scenario 1. Retreat. Bumpy Johnson, calculating that further resistance will only bring more death and potentially federal attention, accepts a modified version of Bonanno's demand. He surrenders control of policy banks in the northernmost sections of Harlem, retains autonomy over his core territory, and agrees to a reduced but guaranteed monthly payment. Why it's plausible: Johnson is outnumbered and outgunned. Bonanno's network has deeper reserves of manpower and capital. A prolonged war of attrition favors the larger, wealthier side. What it costs: Johnson loses face, which in his world is nearly as valuable as money. Rival operators smell weakness and begin testing his control in other areas. His reputation as an uncompromising protector of Harlem's interests is damaged, perhaps irreparably. Within a year, he could be marginalized or dead. Scenario 2. Negotiated settlement. Both sides, recognizing that continued violence invites law enforcement crackdowns that hurt everyone, agree to a brokered truce. A neutral mediator, possibly a senior figure in another Italian family or a respected black political operator, facilitates a new revenue-sharing arrangement. Johnson retains operational control but agrees to formalize payments to Bonanno's network and to coordinate on matters of mutual interest. Why it's plausible: both sides have lost men and money. Neither has achieved a decisive advantage. A deal preserves the status quo while providing Bonanno a foothold for future expansion and Johnson continued autonomy. What it cost, both sides sacrificed the possibility of total victory. Trust remains fragile. The agreement is only as strong as the enforcement mechanisms behind it, and in a world without contracts or courts, enforcement means the credible threat of violence. Scenario 3. All-out escalation. Johnson refuses any compromise and calls in allies from other cities. Philadelphia, Newark, Detroit, where black policy operators face similar pressure from Italian syndicates. The conflict expands into a broader war for control of black gambling markets across the urban Northeast. Bonanno, unwilling to back down, escalates in turn, bringing in reinforcements and targeting not just Johnson, but any operator who supports him. Why it's plausible, principles, and pride matter. Capitulation invites future exploitation. Both men have built their careers on the perception of strength. What it cost? Dozens more dead, federal investigations, potential indictments under racketeering statutes, and the collapse of the very markets both sides are fighting to control. Within the last 48 hours, a new development has altered the equation and raised the stakes once again. On Saturday, February 15th, federal authorities announced the indictment of Anthony Little O.G. Carfano, a senior figure in one of New York's Italian crime families, on charges of interstate racketeering and tax evasion. Carfano, who has close ties to Bonanno and serves as a liaison between the five families, was arrested at his home in Brooklyn Saturday morning and is being held without bail. The indictment, which runs to 43 pages, details a sprawling criminal enterprise involving gambling, loan sharking, and labor union corruption. More importantly, it signals a shift in federal strategy. For years, local police have been the primary, if largely ineffective, check on organized crime. Now Washington is getting involved. The timing is not coincidental. The bloodshed in Harlem has attracted attention beyond New York. Newspapers across the country have covered the story. Editorials have called for action. Pressure is mounting on the Roosevelt administration to demonstrate that it can control lawlessness in America's largest city. The Carfano indictment is a warning shot. If the violence continues, if the bodies keep piling up, the federal government will bring tools that local police cannot: wiretaps, tax investigations, interstate conspiracy charges. For Bonanno, the message is clear. A protracted war risks not just losing men, but losing everything to federal prosecution. For Johnson, the calculation is different but equally urgent. Federal attention could mean crackdowns on policy banking across Harlem, destroying the very prize both sides are fighting over. The question now is whether either man will blink before it's too late. By Monday morning, February 17th, both sides will have to decide. The federal indictment has set a clock ticking. Community leaders have scheduled a meeting for Monday afternoon at the Abyssin Baptist Church, where they will demand an end to the violence and threaten to invite federal intervention if it continues. Police Commissioner Valentine has promised a major announcement Monday evening regarding the Special Task Force's findings. Everyone in Harlem, from the policy runners to the preachers to the men with guns, understands that the 72-hour pause in violence is not peace. It is a held breath. Sources close to both Johnson and Bonanno suggest that back-channel communications have begun. Exactly what is being discussed remains unknown. Whether pride and principle will yield to pragmatism is uncertain. What is certain is that the next 48 hours will determine not just who controls Harlem's policy banks, but how power itself is organized in New York's underworld. Will it be a world of autonomous operators, neighborhood bosses who answer to their communities? Or will it be a world of centralized control, where decisions are made by distant men in distant rooms and enforced by violence? 12 men are dead. More will die if this continues. And the city, its police, its politicians, its ordinary people trying to survive the depression watches and waits to see who blinks first. By Monday night, we will know whether the threat was a bluff, whether negotiation is possible, or whether the war for Harlem has only just begun. The deadline approaches. The guns are quiet, but the pressure is building.